Okay, so Cydrannu, for those of you who don't know, is the name of our knowledge sharing series for procurement and commercial professionals in Wales. It means sharing together in Welsh, and that's something we're really keen becomes core to what Cyd is and does. And for this Cydrannu Knowledge Sharing webinar, we're joined by Corey Hughes from Parago, and Corey's also a member of the Cyd delivery team. She'll be talking to us about the role of procurement and technology in reaching net zero by 2030. We'll then be hearing from Amanda Harris and Chris Hunt from technology solutions provider Centerprise. They're going to be talking a bit about the challenges, lessons learned, insights and opportunities around reporting on Scope 3 emissions, and also the importance of reuse for circular economy, I would never say this, circular economy, environmental, social and governance reporting. I should have just said ESG and got away with it that way. They're also going to look a little bit about the role of public sector buyers in contributing to the positive social, economic and environmental outcomes for communities. As I've said, there will be time for questions, so please do drop any questions you have into the Q&A as we go. Corey's you're already sharing your screen, aren't you, Corey? So we've got the slides up there, so that's perfect. We'll make sure there's time for questions at the end, as I said. The session today is up to an hour. If we finish earlier, then all good, but we will definitely finish on time by 2 o'clock if any of you need to be elsewhere. So with that, I'm going to hand over to you, Corey. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victoria and Angharad as well for the introduction. So yes, I am sharing my screen already. So I'm going to just move on optimistically to the next slide and hope that what we practiced actually works now that we are live. So here we go. Yes, that seems to have happened. So yeah, hi everyone. I am Corey Hughes. Some of you might know me already in my role as service design lead for the Cyd delivery team. I'm also Director of Strategic Design at Parago, and for those of you that don't know a little bit more about us, let me tell you. So we are a Swansea-based company. We partner with organisations to deliver better services through digital. And increasingly, the focus of my work in Parago is on understanding the link between technology, digital, and the environment, particularly as our clients across public sector and government work to meet net zero targets. So Victoria's already mentioned Wales's net zero targets by 2030. And obviously in the other work that we do with different governments, there's different targets, but we're all aiming ambitiously to meet these in the next few years. And just in terms of the slides that I've got then, so I'm trying to practice what I preach here, reduce my own digital carbon footprint. So I've only got a few slides. They are mainly text-based, so not image heavy. So I'm absorbing the feedback that I've got from my colleagues and experts in the digital space of how we can all individually reduce our own digital footprint and carbon emissions. So tracking back then to the work that I've been involved in over the last 12 months through my work as Strategic Design Director at Parago, in addition to Cyd, one project that I wanted to highlight was my role as digital lead for a discovery project that was commissioned by the Centre for Digital Public Services here in Wales. And that project was looking at investigating how digital can support Wales's net zero climate aims. So I'm going to talk about how through that work, we identified a large role and opportunity for procurement and commercial teams to play in supporting this, and how some of the recommendations from that project are being built into the delivery of the Cyd community and associated services. So before I start on that, a quick question, and feel free to put your answer, it's a yes or no, into the chat. So is technology good for the environment? What do you think? It's a big question, and I will share my thoughts on this in a second. Whilst you think about it, I'll tell you why I'm asking. The reason is because the answer that we give here as individuals will tend to drive our decision making. And if you think about decision making in the context of Cyd and procurement and commercial life cycles, this decision making is going to be affected when we buy goods and services, particularly when we're looking at goods and services that might help to solve sustainability challenges in our organizations. So I'm going to put my digital goods and services hat on here. And if you say yes to this question, Helen's just saying the chat seems to be disabled, so I don't know if you can do something about that, tech folks in the background. But if you said yes to the question, is technology good for the environment? You are coming from a motivational point of view where you would take a technical fix approach. And if you say no, then your approach is driven by behaviors and attitudes. So I'll give you an example of this. If you were preparing a brief to reduce air pollution caused by the use of cars in your workplace, and you took a technical fix approach to this, you might look to prepare a brief that commissions a supplier with advanced engine technology to offer electrical vehicle incentives to all staff, for example. So you would believe that technology can be part of the fix in helping us solve our environmental challenges. But if you take the attitudinal fix approach, you're going to lean towards commissioning a supplier who might look at culture change. You might want to offer remote working packages, for example, or reduce the use of cars in entirety as a way for folks to get to work. I'll have a quick peek into the chat of what people have said here. So yeah, we've got a couple of yeses. My take on this is that we need a blend of both. So we need both the technical fix attitude and the behavior and culture change attitude to come together when we are thinking about commissioning new goods and services, particularly when we have the lens of net zero front of mind. And that's where procurement and commercial professionals really have the opportunity to steer the conversation in the very early stages of the commercial life cycle. So I mentioned work that was happening about 12 months ago. And if I cast my mind back then, I was giving a talk at Digital Leaders during the Digital Leaders Week, looking at 10 ideas that we had in Parago to design digital public services in an environmentally conscious way. And at that time, in the news, there was lots of good news stories about how Wales had been on track to hit those net zero targets. We were feeling very optimistic, buoyed and confident by the work that was happening at a policy and strategic level, and also optimistic about the projects that were being commissioned to deliver some of these changes. And this is what that landscape looked like, certainly for me back then. So we were looking at how procurement professionals and all professionals actually across the public sector could start asking questions when they were faced with the opportunity to either commission new digital products and services or redesign new digital products and services in their organization. And one of the things that we talked about here was starting by asking the question. So asking about the consequences of that decision with an environmental and sustainability mindset built in. So that was where we were at. We were at this optimistic stage. We were saying, let's understand the carbon footprint of your digital service. And my colleagues, Amanda and Chris, will talk a little bit more about the practicalities of that in their presentation. And also being transparent with users. So within your organizations, communicating the fact that this is a journey, that we were all learning, that we knew that we were ambitious as a country in setting the agenda and targets for net zero by 2030, but that we were communicating that this is an iterative process and a journey that we all needed to go on. Tucked away there in the later column was this first idea that we were having from our conversations with stakeholders across the public sector in Wales, which was how we could align strategic requirements with sustainability considerations. And baked into that recommendation was this idea that as we have a Centre for Digital Public Services in Wales, who set the standards for the digital ecosystem that we have here as a nation, we also needed that same centre of excellence idea around procurement and commercial, mainly because translating policy, so thinking here about the WPPN 1221, which looks at net zero and its ability for procurement and commercial professionals to have an impact, and then aligning that with sustainability consideration. And that was really key for us, that we started that conversation. And at that stage, keyed did not exist as it does now. The actual project itself of the Centre for Procurement Excellence was in its early stages of discovery to understand the problem. And we were thinking about the future and what that could look like. So fast forward to where we're at today. I'm sure plenty of you will have seen the news recently. There have been some criticisms about how prepared we are as a country to meet those net zero targets, some focus on the public sector and its role to play. And it feels like the conversation has shifted from 12 months ago to where we're at, certainly in terms of what I think Solitaire Townsend says, net zero and climate change is communicating itself. We don't need to talk about the uncertainty and challenges anymore. What we need is a strategy to communicate the opportunity. So I really wanted to just pause and reflect on what we had there in the later column is now a reality for us in terms of the work that we have been doing with the key team to deliver the new services that will help procurement and commercial specialists across the public sector in Wales look at how net zero targets can be reached and supported through a better, more user-centered and iterative approach to buying goods and services. To get to that point, we worked on a project called Tech Net Zero. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that. Tech Net Zero, again, was about understanding the link between tech, digital, and the environment. And it was a very broad-ranging discovery. We talked to professionals, both from within Wales and the public sector. We also looked at international good practice and our colleagues in England and Scotland as well. And the big unexpected, I suppose, learning from this was the focus on buying digital goods and services. So before you get to the stage where you're making design decisions, what role could procurement and commercial life cycle have to play in helping us buy the right technologies, evaluate the technologies that we already have in our organization, and make smarter decisions about what we choose to use to help deliver our digital public services. I just wanted to take a focus on this quote here that came out of the discovery research, which was highlighting from a digital and technology lead in health and care, the fact that there seemed to be a real gap in good practice for digital practitioners to understand when they write a spec, the things that they should be thinking about and reflecting in a tender when it came to starting that conversation with suppliers about how the services they offered could also support net zero aims. That felt like it was happening in pockets, but not consistently. And there was a real ask there for these professionals to link up with their procurement and commercial colleagues and think strategically about how those conversations could start. The recommendations then that came out of that Tech Net Zero discovery, focusing on the role that procurement has to play in supporting Wales's net zero targets, were these four potential solutions. So one of them was to provide guidance on embedding net zero goals within digital procurement. That came out loud and clear. The second was, how do you involve sustainability specialists early in procurement decision-making? And this is something that we've seen throughout the course of delivering the keyed services, is when does procurement start? And actually a lot of the work that goes into shaping a tender or preparing a brief is happening way early on down the supply chain. And the potential to actually involve sustainability specialists, whether they're within your organization or externally, was something that people were asking us for when we conducted that discovery. The importance of developing vendor relationships to include net zero goals was also something that was very high priority for the stakeholders that we engaged with. That was really thinking about, again, the whole life cycle and having the confidence to challenge suppliers, to ask the right questions, again, going back to that idea of asking what are the consequences of these decisions, but also maybe working with multidisciplinary teams and creating new partnerships and being open to that idea of partnership working when bringing in experts and suppliers to deliver digital projects. And we've certainly seen that in terms of our work in Parago. So our project with Tech Net Zero was delivered in partnership with MSpark, who are an incredibly talented bunch of low carbon experts working up in North Wales. The work that we are doing on Cyd for the Welsh Government is also being delivered in partnership with our commercial and procurement lifecycle consultancy experts, Kershaw. And so that means that we're bringing different expertise together, we're delivering more value, and we are thinking about the sustainability implications of the work we do at all stages. The final recommendation then to think about in the role that procurement has to play in meeting net zero aims is making user-centered design. So user-centered design is all about how do we make services more efficient, and so potentially the fallout of that, or the unintended consequence of user-centered design, is that we make services greener by default. So we want to make user-centered design part of buying as well as building products and services. And this is an approach that we've seen taken in lots of different areas internationally, where that service design approach is encouraging procurement and commercial professionals to work in a more agile way. So that could look like small iterative steps, so not waiting for big bangs, but actually how do we construct contracts that allow for that iterative and agile approach. It's about thinking about users from the outset, so having those conversations, being prepared to test as we go along, thinking of the end-to-end journey, so not just focusing on one part of the procurement cycle or route, but thinking about how it all joins together. And where I really wanted to end, I suppose, in talking about the role that I think procurement can have in supporting net zero targets is how this work from Tech Net Zero has now led into some of the delivery challenges and opportunities that we have been tackling through our work on Cyd. So if I go back to these four, so providing guidance on embedding net zero goals within digital procurement, again, we validated that with the community. We are looking at exactly what we're in today, sessions like Cydrannu, to bring experts together to test this approach and see what knowledge the community wants to learn, and then bringing that as part of the Cyd service. Involving sustainability specialists in procurement decision-making. Much of the work that's been done through Cyd has actually been through the lens of net zero. So a lot of the work that the team have been doing is reaching out to different sustainability experts, introducing them to procurement and commercial professionals within the public sector community in Wales, sparking conversations that wouldn't otherwise have happened, and just being able to create those working groups that take some great ideas forward to test and learn from. Vendor relationships, again, we've talked about toolkits and how to build confidence in having those conversations at early stages, particularly around measurement. And I won't steal Amanda and Chris's thunder by talking about that, because they have the real life examples of that in a delivery context. And then finally, user-centered design. So user-centered design has been the approach that we've taken through Cyd to, first of all, decide what problems needed to be solved, and then build services incrementally and test and learn. So we have a Cyd website now that is live. It's in its very early stages. Those of you involved in the user testing community will know that we have more coming behind the scenes that will be launched on an iterative basis. And the Cyd service itself must link with other digital tools and technology to enable procurement and commercial professionals in Wales to do their jobs in a more efficient and user-centered way. And so we have to take that meta view, if you like, of Cyd to constantly ask ourselves, are we making sure that the service we are designing is supporting the net zero goals that we know have been set? You know, are we making sure that our design choices and our decision making and our role as suppliers to Welsh Government is in the spirit of blending that technical and attitudinal approach that I talked about at the beginning? So those were just some thoughts from my work over the last year or so. As I say, I'll go back to what Solitaire Townsend said, which I think is we can really focus here on communicating some of the risks the challenges, the uncertainty that climate change brings. But we're kind of at a point where what we need to do is focus on the opportunities. And way back in that discovery with Tech Net Zero, the role of procurement to just bridge the gap between the strategic objectives in Wales and the delivery approach, and focusing on how we make that policy applied to deliver real targets and measure them effectively. And that is the work that we have been doing in earnest. So thank you to all of you out there who have contributed so far. That's it from me. If there are any questions, again, please drop them in the chat and I will come back to them. And now I will pass over to my colleagues, Amanda and Chris, who are going to talk about the work that they're doing in this space.
Thank you, Corey, and hopefully they will be able to pick up the screen sharing from there, but hold on a sec, Corey, in case we need you to work through those slides.
I will hold my mouse over the share button.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. So I'm Amanda Harris, the Director of Asset Management at Centerprise International. So for those of you who have never heard of Centerprise, Centerprise International is an IT solution provider who provides public and private sector organisations with a portfolio of products and services, including end-user compute, managed services, cloud services, to name a few. Headquartered out of Basingstoke with our operations facility based in Caerphilly. And last month we celebrated our 40th anniversary. Centerprise recognised a number of years ago that the circular economy was going to provide solution providers with challenges as organisations moved to more service-led requirements, ensuring that we remained current and provided a portfolio of services to complement our historical hardware reseller business, and having in-house capabilities to provide the type of services that they will require for years to come is vital. Whilst providing these products and services in a sustainable way with social value and charitable outcomes. Next slide, Chris. The world is extracting materials faster than the world's population growth. It is recognised that natural materials at current consumption rates will run out for gold and silver in 15 years, platinum and copper in 30 years. It is all of our responsibilities to ensure that we start to reuse and put IT hardware back into the circular economy to not only save our consumption rates on these materials, but also to achieve the results slowing down climate change.
Amanda,
Also,
Amanda, can I just interrupt you a second?
so how can all of us?
Your screen isn't sharing?
Oh, really?
Ah, yeah. I thought it was just me at first, but someone else has just messaged me to say our screen's not working. You can give it another go, and if it doesn't work, Corey can pick up. So don't worry if it's that looks like it's going to work. We've got your Zoom screen up now, so if you can shift to the slides, we should.
Right, can you see the slides now?
Yeah, we got it now. Thank you. If you want to pick up,
Cool.
we can hear you. But
Apologies, everyone.
no worries. Thank you.
I'll start from this slide. So yes, so it's all of our responsibilities to obviously start to reuse and put IT hardware back into the circular economy. So how can all of us reduce our carbon footprint? So 270 million new laptops are shipped annually. My typical product report bases this
Amanda, sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt you again because I think your internet has dropped off. If it's the same for everybody else, your sound is disappearing on us. Oh, yeah, somebody else has just said they can't hear it either. I'm not sure if there's an alternative. And if not, we might have to go to...
Can you hear me now?
Oh, hang on, yeah, you just reappeared. We lost you.
Okay, you can hear now, yeah?
Yeah, we got well, how many? 270 million laptops, and then you disappeared on us.
Oh, okay, apologies. Just when you don't want the internet to play up, hey?
Yeah,
So manufacturers are now providing carbon footprint statistics for their new products. So a typical product report bases this on 4 years use, the majority of which is in manufacturing, with 17% for use and 1% for end of life management. A refurbished product accounts for 25% of the footprint of a new product. So if all organisations, large, small, public sector or private sector, purchased a percentage of the hardware as refurbished, this would greatly reduce all of our carbon footprints. Next slide, Chris. IT asset disposal at end of life is so much more than what most people realise. By simply doing things differently, we can make a change to the planet, not only sustainably by using circular economics of social outcomes to underprivileged areas. So what is Centreprise doing to make a difference? So we're not only extending the life of the hardware through our IT asset recovery business, the hardware that public and private organisations are disposing of, we are also working with a charity to provide social outcomes in both in the UK and abroad, with ESG reporting tied in to ensure that organisations can report on what they're actually doing. IT assets should never be classed as waste or collected by an organisation collected as waste. By using a reputable organisation, your end-of-life hardware is given a second life, helping the environment and with a charitable outcome. So in addition to purchasing a percentage of your IT client devices as refurbished, what else can we do? Well, we work in partnerships and collaboratively to achieve some great social outcomes, whether that is locally or abroad. The Western world has spent the last 40 years unknowingly making some areas, such as Africa, the most toxic places on earth by donating equipment to these areas under the guise of charity. But it isn't until now that we've realised that sending a mixture of different hardware that sometimes requires different operating systems to areas that have little IT knowledge isn't going to work. You wouldn't send a 75-year-old's clothes to a 5-year-old child, but that is what has been happening with IT. And for every action, there is a consequence. But by doing things differently, for every child, there is a better chance. So Centreprise partners with a charity called Sunscreen IT, whereby we donate a percentage of our net margin from providing the asset disposal services to their clients. They then utilise the funds to purchase sustainable thin client technology in-store and remotely managed for the duration of its life. This in turn enables people in underprivileged areas to receive IT skills that they wouldn't have received otherwise. For every £6 donated, this allows Sunscreen IT to provide IT skills to one person for 12 months. In 2015, Sunscreen IT did a project in Sierra Leone, and last year the first graduates secured full-time jobs utilising those skills, which in Sierra Leone is not common, and also for women is even more uncommon. They do not only do projects abroad. In September last year, in collaboration with Children in Need and BBC DIY SOS, did a project installing a media lab in Leeds. Sunscreen IT are happy to work with Centreprise's customers to undertake local projects in Wales, in addition to the social charitable projects that Centreprise are already involved with. Next one, Chris. In addition to the above, that's it again, with sustainability becoming more and more the forefront of people's minds, we also provide ESG reports to customers that utilise us for our asset disposal services, an example of which is currently on the slide. It provides information such as amount of equipment collected, number of devices processed, and how many went back into the circular economy, and what that means in terms of water saved, raw mining avoided, and tons of carbon avoided by new equipment not having to be remanufactured. This, along with all of the higher certifications and coupled together with reuse, social and charitable outcomes, aligns us with 6 of the UN global goals as well. I'm now going to pass over to Chris, who will go through our sustainability management and our scope reporting.
Thank you, Amanda. So, as Sir Nicholas Stone has mentioned there, climate change is the largest and most reaching market failure in the history of the world. I think that is absolutely true. Now, for us, as Centerprise, we have been certificated since 2008 from the 14001 perspective. And for that, we have demonstrated that we do consider the environment to be very, very important. And as you can see from Amanda's brief, we've been DESA certified now for several years. So environmental aspects are really at the forefront of what we do. And as part of that, we really do understand that we've got to do sustainability. And we've recognised that there's got to be a strategy, process management, environmental policy, and it also affects the society as well. So, as you see, we've got a production facility and warehouse in Wales. And, that is the figurehead of our environmental. It has solar panels, and it's quite a substantial area. Recently, we have joined the UN. So we're proud to say we're now a member of the Global Compact Network, which the UN supports. And that looks at our environmental social governance. And what their definitions are is that the organisation as a steward of nature covers the environmental aspects. We've got to understand the social aspect, what we bring to the local infrastructure and the community as a whole, and how we govern. So obviously we've used UN as part of that governance. Our 14001 is another governance that we've done. Now, to support the UN Global Compact, we have to adhere to the 10 principles. And those are related around human rights, labour, environmental, and anti-corruption. And the way we fulfil those 10 principles are documented within our ISO certifications. It forms the core reason why we have those certifications. So even though we're a recent addition to the UN, we had that evidence already at hand. Going on to carbon reduction, it is very, very important that we do look at how we are impacting the environment. And yes, we do our scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. And we produce this report every year. And we use 2019 as our baseline. So scope 3 there is all the ones that the government says we've got to cover at this stage. Now, scope 1 is quite straightforward. It's the amount of gas we use, the company-owned vehicles, the generators, and the aircon. And as you can see from the graph there, we've done quite well in reducing the amount of CO2 that's been emitted. It's also the same with our electricity consumption. We have seen reductions year on year end. Okay? However, when it comes to scope 3, we're going totally the wrong way. And you may ask, well, why is that? And it's predominantly to do with the amount of sales. Due to COVID, there was such an uptake in IT and refreshing of laptops. A lot of people migrated from having a desktop PC to laptops to make us more of a hybrid workers. And we've seen that year on year end. So that really has affected our carbon reduction plan. So as you can see there, from 2019, 2020, 21, we had the original goal was in the blue graph. And last year, we had to really think again about how we're going to do this correctly. And as part of our learning curve, we've identified where we can do better capture of emissions. And part of that is our scope 3. And one of the things that we're doing is that we're now going out to our strategic partners like Lenovo, Dell, Apple, and various others, and asking them what their carbon footprint is when it comes to products. And majority of these sites do have access to what their products are releasing. So here we have the typical ThinkPad, which we're asked for most. And you can see there for the life cycle of the laptop, it's 419 kilos of CO2 emission. And thankfully, Lenovo does break it down quite nicely in their pie chart on where those emissions lie. And as you can see then from the use and the manufacturing and the motherboard is quite high. And what we're doing as a company is that we're working closely with our strategic partners to make sure that this data is being captured. So our SAP system that we use for placing orders has just recently been amended. So any new item that's created, the users will be prompted to put a carbon figure within the SAP system. And this is one of the reasons why we are moving this way and why we had to change the way we did our graph. Now, as you can see there also with the graph, is that I predicted that our carbon is still going to increase all the way up to 2027. Whilst that could be a shock and horror and going the wrong way, or the way the government wants it, it's us understanding how much carbon we're actually producing. And it's going to take that while, and BIS also automatically know this, is that as our understanding improves, our carbon footprint will increase. And one of the things that I have tried to do in the last 3 years is whatever new metrics we have done and employed, I've backdated it. And this is why the orange marker is much, much higher than our original baseline. Okay, so as per that statement by Margaret Mead, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. That is so true. There's people like yourselves and ourselves that are looking at the impact we're having on the environment, and we're the people that can make that change. And hopefully, if we can do that, we can inspire the next generation to do that also. I hope you found that informative. And please, if you have any questions, please do ask.
Thank you very much, Amanda and Chris, and also to Corey for that. And there's some really different angles and food for thought coming out of all of it. And this is the time that people can ask questions. So you've got the Q&A function there. Please drop them in and we can invite you up to ask, or you can just put them in anonymously if you don't feel comfortable doing so, and I'm happy to ask them on your behalf. So while people have a little think about that or get their typing skills going, that point I was making there, you know, Corey, you talked about some of the principles and the things to think about, and then we heard stuff from what you're doing in Centerprise and how understanding that measurement has been so important about you thinking about how you then take action. I suppose, how do people start out? How do they go from the level you were thinking about, Corey, to actually being able to do something about it and make changes to the way, and then even more so, for procurement's perspective, when it's at that early stage of thinking and asking the right questions. So sorry, there was quite a lot in there, but my head's spinning with all the different thoughts of that. Corey, do you want to have a first shot of your thoughts after listening to Amanda and Chris as well?
Yeah, well, I guess my answer will be predictable in that I would say how you bridge the gap is by coming back to those principles of user-centered design, right? So, you know, one of the things that we have been experimenting with in Keed is how we take that iterative approach to designing products and services, and even in, you know, our role as a supplier there, and with our partners Kershaw, working with Welsh Government to test the different stages and the gates that we are going through. We've taken, the discovery was completed, it's handed over into an alpha that is now an extended alpha. So we are not jumping to try and release something that, you know, hasn't been tested and thought through, and we're learning all the time in that space. So I really think that that is where the opportunity for procurement and commercial life cycle to adopt some of those learnings from a user-centered approach, because we see it all the time. And I know my colleagues in procurement will not hate me if I say that sometimes the processes that are in place are incredibly, you know, antiquated and cause a huge amount of frustration. And everyone that I've spoken to within the procurement community in Wales are trying to use technology to address some of these, legacy blockers around how procurement has always been done. And I think that will really help turn strategy into action if we can bridge the gap and bring those different ways of thinking together, which I've certainly seen work well through this process.
Thank you, Amanda. Chris, any thoughts on that?
From our point of view, if you engage from a procurement side of things, majority of the strategic partners we work with will give you the life cycle of the product and the carbon. So you may have a product in mind, and we will work with procurement and say, okay, you've thought about this one. Have you thought about the next generation, which has a lower carbon footprint? And from what I've been working on, I've seen that all the way through. Previous generations of laptops and PCs does have a higher carbon footprint. And we're all learning, even our strategic partners, the manufacturers, they're getting better at capturing that carbon.
And I think you're right. That moment of COVID has changed. COVID's changed the world a bit, but actually it has when it comes to the use of technology and the speed at which we moved into that, probably without that thinking. I'm not saying it didn't happen anywhere, but probably without that thinking really being part of the process that organisations undertook to get their people able to work in a way that they just hadn't worked before. So is that something you've seen, that people are starting to switch now to being more considerative of some of the carbon emissions issues when they're coming to procurement, particularly around the technology they're using?
From a tender point of view, yes. You're getting more and more questions now about sustainability. So it's in everyone's interest to ensure that carbon is at the forefront.
And I think, Corey, the work that Keed is doing with the community to even go right back to what those first questions are we should be asking is quite an important one, along with, obviously you talk about design thinking, I'd expect you to talk about nothing less, but some of those questions, and actually supporting the procurement and commercial communities in Wales to be able to actually go, what, these are the right things we need to think about, and technology isn't going to go away, and it is the right answer to a lot of the questions we have, but how do we support people to really get the right things into those specs from the outset?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, there are stats floating around out there, aren't there, that the internet would be the 6th largest polluter in the world, and our reliance on devices has gone up by 75%. What we saw in our discovery work was certainly that asked for consistency. Is certainly in carbon reporting, that was something where there was a gap in the public sector. And, as all good procurement professionals want to measure the outcome of the products and services that are eventually contracted. It comes back, I suppose, to design thinking for me, because we ask those questions, right? So a user-centered approach, ask those questions early, bringing that into the procurement and commercial space and asking what the consequences are is key, and raising the confidence of everyone to do that together collectively.
So, and there's no questions coming at the minute, which is fine. I'll let people have one last chance to ask anything they want to before we finish up, and whilst I give them that pause, I suppose I'm going to ask each of you, Corey, Chris and Amanda, to give us the one thing that you'd like people to be doing differently. And I'm saying maybe for Corey it's more around service, maybe measurement, it may be thinking about it, but if you were saying to procurement and commercial professionals, look, here's the one thing, if we're going to really tackle this, if you start somewhere, this is where I would suggest you start, what would your answer be? Any volunteers to go first on that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. So from a procurement basis, and we've already started to see tenders coming out, with a percentage against social value, etc. It would be good for tenders at end of life equipment, for instance, to actually think of what happens to that equipment more at the end, rather than just as long as I get my certificate or it's disposed of in accordance with WE legislation, and that's it. That's what everybody seems to concentrate at the moment. But think out of the box and what happens to it more after you've got it collected, you know, and what those companies are doing to help with sustainability and social value, and how that what actually happens to the components within the devices at the point of disposal. So I think there's some learning curves for some procurement around that.
And I guess it's kind of easy to think about, what's the spec for what I need today?
Mm-hmm.
And any future thinking goes perhaps into the 3 years, the first 3 years, support, maintenance, all of that. But that bit about actually there's a cost, you know, whether that's a financial or environmental or any other cost after it. So
Yeah.
thank you. That is a good one for us. Thank you. Chris?
Just expanding on what Amanda's saying, think about when you're looking at brand new laptops and PCs at the moment, obviously we're mining those minerals that our manufacturers are. And as an example, a lot of laptops and PCs have palladium in them. And palladium is only sourced, majority of it is sourced from Russia. So you can see straight away there is going to be a potential risk. You know, where is that going to come in the future? So the mindset has really got to change and look at refurbished or recycled laptop, whether it's brand new material that's made out of a recycled thing.
It's something we hear more and more about, things like, you know, fast fashion and the fashion industry shift its thinking for very similar reasons. And it's actually something that goes across far wider into any consumables, actually. Really thinking about the provenance and about future-proofing, being very conscious about what it is we're buying and what the purpose is for it, but equally what's going to happen to it afterwards as well. Thank you. Corey?
Oh yeah, so I agree with Amanda and Chris. I think that is great to actually think about how things end and where you can pick up new opportunities. I guess for me, it's a learning from working so closely with procurement commercial professionals through Keed, and that is the idea that I'll borrow from my colleague Warren Smith, who's Associate Director at Kershaw, working with us in Keed, who talks about stories of change. And the kind of plea, I guess, that I would have to procurement commercial professionals is to be confident to share those stories of change. And that really means not waiting until something has been polished and is completed to share the learnings of what is happening in your own organisations, because we know in Wales there are lots of different sizes and shapes of procurement and commercial teams. Everybody adds value when they share their learnings, whether that is focused on net zero or other areas of policy in Wales, but that really is something that we're trying to surface through the Keed service and put that focus on delivery. You know, people are delivering, even though we know the targets are further away. You know, they're a few years away, not that far, even though we know the procurement environment around reform is constantly changing, certainly for higher value, you know, routes through the commercial life cycle. What are we doing? And we know that work is happening. So sharing it, talking about it in the open, I think is really key.
Perfect. That's a nice segue into my favourite subject of working in the open. So thank you, Corey. And it is really important to us, and it's why I'm really grateful to all of you for giving your time today to actually share your stories and your learning, and you know where things have worked, where they haven't, what we need to be thinking about differently. Because without that openness to share, we become quite isolated and blinkered in our thinking. And Keed is all about how we take those stories of change out and get people supporting each other and provide the support and the information and knowledge and experience that's going to help us all do things differently. So thank you very much for that. I'll just finish off today then, just a bit of information on these webinars. Next month is Civil Service Live, the time of these webinars. So we'll be taking a break from them for both July and August, because hopefully people will be off enjoying themselves in the sunshine, although I think it's all happening looking out my window now. It'll be raining by August, but people will be taking a break. We're hoping to come back in September with some face-to-face sessions. It was always the intention with Cydrannu that it would be a mix of online and face-to-face. These first 4 sessions have been online. We'd love to bring it out onto the road a little bit and get to meet some people face-to-face, as well as continuing some online interactions. session. So we'll be sharing more details of that very soon. So that just leaves me to thank you, Corey, Amanda and Chris, for your time today and for sharing your stories. Thank you to those of you who've joined us. As always, with the recording, we'll make sure this is up on the site so you'll be able to watch back and share with your colleagues as well. Hope you enjoyed the rest of your days, and thank you very much to all of you.
Thanks, everyone.